I'm wearing my Ravenclaw necklace and my Marauder's map jumper in preparation for this video. Let's do this. Hello everyone, welcome back to Booking Forward to It. Today I'll be doing the Harry Potter personality book tag. Thank you so much to Bubbly Bookend for tagging me to do this video. Very, very excited. Let's start with Gryffindor, a book that took a lot of strength and bravery to finish. For this, I'm going to be talking about The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. This book follows the friendship between two boys who are growing up in Afghanistan, and it takes us through the Soviet invasion and the rise of the Taliban. It is brutal and inspiring and made me weep like an infant. And it did take me a lot of strength to get through those really tragic parts, especially since I was about like 15 or 16 when I read it, even though I could barely put it down. It was such an amazing book. Next, Ravenclaw, a book that left you more enlightened or educated. Now for this, I'll be mentioning Behind the Beautiful Forevers by Catherine Boo. This is a non-fiction book that follows several people living their lives in a Mumbai slum. For me, it challenged a lot of preconceived notions I had about poverty and about life in India. I loved especially, for instance, the way it dealt with corruption. I think generally when we think of corruption, we think of these like rich fat cats like screwing over the poor and like taking what's rightfully theirs. But this book shines a light on those instances where corruption can actually serve the interests of the people living in the slum, and how some people actually stand to benefit from corruption, how in some cases the community is actually better off. I wouldn't be able to explain the details to you because it was a long time since I read it and it was a bit complicated, but it was so fascinating, and I think it adds so much nuance and complexity and really humanizes the issues in communities. Now for Hufflepuff, a book in which you felt as though you were part of the friendship group. This is a total cop-out, but I'll be talking about Harry Potter. This is probably the only series that I've read so ferociously and reread so many times that I feel like I know all the characters like the back of my own hand. When I was a kid, and probably to some extent still now, I just wanted to be best friends with Harry, Ron and Hermione, like more than I could bear to tell anyone. The friendship was so comforting and supportive, and it really brings back the sense of nostalgia and like a sense of really warm childhood feelings when I think about their friendship. Now for Slytherin, a book in which you rooted for the villain. Another cop-out, but I'm going for Frankenstein. Oh, shook the camera there. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I, like everyone else who read this book, started off by viewing Frankenstein as a sympathetic character. You were kind of rooting for him, but then you hear the creature's narrative, and the creature's narrative just breaks your heart and just feel so much for the creature, and you just want the creature to find happiness and find some source of comfort in this cruel world that Frankenstein has just thrown him into. This may be kind of a spoiler, so maybe jump ahead 10 seconds if you want to avoid this little tidbit if you're thinking of reading this for the first time. By the end of the novel, you kind of hate Frankenstein for his hubris and recklessness and just the way he treats the people he cares about. A bit dodge. Harry, a book that started off weak but finished with a punch. For this, I want to talk about Where Angels Fear to Tread by E.M. Forster, which follows the scandal of a young, wealthy widow who suddenly marries an Italian man, much to the horror and dismay of her family back in England. Of course, at that time, you know, even Italy was seen as this very exotic, very like kind of almost mysterious, dark, dangerous place. This was my first Forster, and safe to say, when I started reading this book, it took me a little while to get used to his writing style. I'd never really encountered anything like it before, but it did not take me long at all to fall in love with his sardonic, scathing tone. Interesting story of how I came to acquire this book. As you can see, it's full of my post-its and annotations. I actually bought this as part of my required reading for a university English class, but I went to the first tutorial of this class, hated the tutorial because I felt like it was really boring and nothing was getting done, and I was sitting there being like, we're not talking about the book yet, and we're 20 minutes in and the lecturer is still going on a tangent about postmodernism, and this is not postmodernist literature. I'm so confused. Safe to say I did not continue with the course, but I did buy lots of books from diverse authors, and this is how I was introduced to E.M. Forster, so I guess everything happens for a reason. Hermione, a book with a really smart female main character. Another kind of boring response, I'll be talking about Jane Eyre. And I say boring because it's not very original or inspired, but the book Jane Eyre is not boring. I just admire Jane so much as a narrator. I think I love the way she appraises all the people and all the situations she she finds herself in against her own values and against her own moral code. I think she's such a great heroine. Now for Ron, a book in which a character has to overcome a fear. For this, I want to mention Storyland by Catherine McKinnon. In this novel, there's a narrator called Will who's on an expedition in 1796 along the east coast of WA, of Western Australia. Nope. East coast of Australia. What? There is no east coast of Western Australia. That's the west coast. Anyway, this character has encounters with some of the Aboriginal Indigenous communities living along that coast. And I think it's so fascinating to see how his perceptions of them morph and develop throughout his journey. At the time, you know, these white explorers, colonialists thought these, you know, Indigenous communities, these were full of like these savage cannibal people, like this very racist kind of perception of this new community and these new cultures. But it's interesting to see how when he has a chance to interact with some of these communities and even kind of forges these almost friendships with a couple of these people, see that thought process, you know, ticking along in his mind. Now for Luna, a book that started off a bit weird but ended up being really enjoyable. So for this, I want to mention Poor Things by Alistair Gray. With this book, I was initially weirded out a bit by the premise. So the premise is a young medical genius discovers the body of a woman who's drowned herself in the river, but she's also 9 months pregnant, and he decides to reanimate her with all his medical knowledge and skill, but he reanimates her with the brain of a 9-month-old fetus transplanted in her skull. So now she's this grown woman with the mind of an infant. And it's, yeah, the premise I found a bit creepy, a bit weird, but also really, really intriguing. So that really drove me to pick this up eventually. I actually heard about it on BookTube, so thank you BookTube. It was well worth the read, I really enjoyed it. Gilderoy Lockhart, a series that started off really well, but kind of fizzled out towards the end. Now for this, I'm gonna say The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare. I got roped into these by a good friend of mine when I was about 14 and really, you know, burning through all my young adult paranormal romance books. My school library had about the first 4 or 5 of these books. By the time I got to the 4th one, I had to wait for the 5th one to get off of, to, you know, be ordered in, or to, you know, wait for someone to return it. And in that time frame, I guess I lost interest and moved on to other things. Now for Snape, a book with an antagonist character that actually ends up being kind of helpful. So last but not least, I wanted to talk about the Ranger's Apprentice series by John Flanagan. Now this is the first book in the series, but it's called The Ruins of Gorlan. And fun fact, I found this for $2 in a charity book sale, like outside of a pharmacy or something, next to my local gym. Yeah, how lucky is that? This book does the thing I really, really love when two characters kind of hate each other at the beginning. There's a bit of a rivalry, maybe they're even like flat out enemies, but then after like a shared moment, maybe they face an instance of adversity together, you know, fight against a common foe, whatever it may be, they end up being friends. I love that trope. I'm so here for it. It is so wholesome. This is a series that I'd also really, really recommend. Great high fantasy, kind of middle grade, but I think can be enjoyed by any age. It is so lovely, and it's by an Australian author, so definitely pick this up if you haven't heard of it. Thank you so much for watching if you made it this far. All books and booktubers mentioned will be linked down below. And finally, I'd like to leave you wonderful viewers with a question. Which of the spells in Harry Potter do you most identify with? For me, I reckon it will be Expelliarmus, because I find myself constantly disarming people with my charm and good looks. Please tell me in the comments down below, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye!